is he? Surprise. Whoa! Please stop. The Invisible Man should be seen.
Look at that. Look at that.
Oh, God. Sometimes I impress myself, but you know who else impresses me? Leigh Whannell. This is the remake of Hollow Man.
In some senses.
Excited to talk about this movie. You know, when I saw the trailer for this film, very confident this would be a really cool movie. My one concern, and I want to get this out of the way immediately, my one concern was that the trailers show you way too much. While I will concede that I still feel like they could have dialed it back because sometimes there are plot points that occur. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot I saw that in the trailer, but now I know what's going to happen next. There's still a lot of surprises in this movie. Overall, I think it is a tense film. It is a scary movie. The performances are great. Visually, really well done. In the first 2/3 of the movie, I'd say, are done in a really subtle manner, which to do The Invisible Man, I think, is the smartest way to do it. The film, I think, toys a lot with perspective, toys a lot with expectation versus the outcome. There are a lot of times in this movie where we're like, oh, well, now this happens, so I know what's going to happen. But then no, it doesn't go down the way how a lot of how I thought things would go down. Bottom line thoughts. I know people click off reviews early, so I just want to make sure I got the gist of everything out of the way.
Yeah.
Before we hop into details. Johnny?
Yeah, I thought this was really terrific too, and I was glad that they really decided to go all in and make a monster film out of this that encompasses, you know, the science fiction. I feel like the thing that the trailers don't give away too much of is the context. There's a lot of rich context, like there's no detail that's left uncolored, and yeah, it's a really smart take on the story that fits this time, that justifies its existence. The style, just everything in the physical elements of the movie that come together to make it are really complementary to the central premise. All the monster stuff has sort of a unified iconography that I think is really impressive in a subtle way. This had my heart rate percolating like the entire movie, which hasn't happened in a while. You know, like there are a lot of horror movies I appreciate, but it's been a little while since a movie had me this nervous the entire time, looking around all the backgrounds. Also, great use of sound in this. Like, I think that's, you brought that up. You play it subtle for a while because, it gives you a chance in your own mind to start living in the shoes of the character and fearing where and when and how he's going to show up, you know?
Yeah, because the big backdrop of this is domestic violence, abuse, survivor, lingering, traumatic, residual repercussions, what have you, having to endure a relationship like that, the suffering, lingering trauma of how that alters so much your perspective on everything around you. And I think the film does an excellent job at that. Like, yeah, it's called The Invisible Man. It's from Universal. You know it's an actual Invisible Man. The trailers really cue you in on that. Even before we get to the Invisible Man stuff, I don't want to give anything away. There's some really tense stuff that goes on in here that has nothing to do with the invisible part. With how they handle the Invisible Man elements, I thought was cool, because I think a lot of the time with a movie like this, you might expect to hop into the point of view of the Invisible Man and like watch him stalking, kind of like Hollow Man.
Well, and the original
H.G.
Wells story is not the same exact kind of horror tale, but it is about, you know, a scientist trying to break through something. In the book, he's a mad scientist already. In the movie, he's sympathetic and then becomes mad. Yeah,
you don't really get to know him. You only know him from Cecilia Elisabeth Moss's character, her perspective on it. A lot of the POV shots go into her vision. A lot of the time, what this film does visually, that's, I think, very cool. You brought up when we were watching it, kind of like Haunting a Hill House, where you start looking at frames and going, is something moving there? Is there something? Did that move? Did that move? Is he right there?
It makes
is he
you paranoid.
Yeah.
It makes you paranoid with her, and I think that alleviates some of the element of we know that it's an invisible man and she's not actually crazy.
And I think like it's a really great character-driven movie. Elisabeth Moss, you get an actress like her, you want to give her a really great character. And here she gets so much opportunity to shine. The amount of nuance she brings to this role. Some just great character scenes that are given to her while her journey, starting off as a victim. Yeah, you know where her journey will eventually go, but it's not about the destination necessarily, even though the destination in this film is very important. The film is so grounded. Like, this is such a science fiction, ridiculous idea, you know, an invisible man who's figured out how to do this. Somehow, the way the writing is done with her character, it's so expertly crafted that you're like, this is probably the realistic version of how she would go through this, which I really find impressive.
I gotta give two sets of props because, in a way, I mean, you know, the original Invisible Man is a well-revered film, but it is different from the original H.G. Wells story, and I think it's interesting that Leigh Whannell took it back to, this guy's already screwed up, so we see it from a different perspective, but I also have to give huge props to Elisabeth Moss, because this is true of other works she's been in, and definitely of this movie from the interviews I've read, is she actually was very integral in shaping the character, and
that's cool.
She and Leigh Whannell would often have scenes rewritten that they dissected together. He basically said he wanted her, and once she was cast, he was like, I need you to kind of help me make this character lived in.
Yeah, because while there is like suspenseful moments that are done visually so well, that are just flat out, at times really scary with the Invisible Man, a big part, especially within, I'd say, the first half of this movie, that makes it so effective, you're watching how the Invisible Man is actually psychologically destroying her internally before real physical stuff actually starts going down.
Yeah.
And that's what adds so much extra weight. You're watching, I don't want to go into details because this is stuff that's not in the trailers. The effect that it has on her relationships. I don't mean just like
on her
boyfriend,
life
girlfriend,
across
just, like,
the board.
everyone who she personally interacts with. The great use of music here too.
Yeah. Chilling score. That mixes both very modern sounds and very classic monster movie sounds, which I appreciated.
I also think this movie's dealing with a lot of, you know, rather very sensitive subject material that could have just ended up being a rather generic take on, because I'm someone who's actually against the whole like sexual assault trope, and now she's strong. And I think the way this movie handles the trauma is done rather tastefully. So I actually didn't know what you just told me until right now about Elisabeth Moss working directly with Leigh Whannell to flesh out this character.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's handled so well.
Yeah.
Because there are certain things that are thrown in here, certain reveals that you find out. Oh, that is so disturbing. But it's not done to be like, yeah, now
Look how
go get
nasty
the Invisible
this
Man is. Go get him now, because now you feel sorry for her. Because it's not about doing that layer for cheap effect, which I think a lot of movies usually do with female characters who are going up against the man who wronged them.
A lot of other movies don't give that the actual nuanced weight. They just take the bright, shiny, you know, oh, here's the horrific thing, and they throw it at you. This really unpacks all that horror, and that's the thing, is the monster is built off of so much more than just brute force and menace.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think it's really cool how, you know, if you've seen Leigh Whannell's Upgrade, he really figured out a visual flair for action sequences. And it's cool to see him apply a lot of what he tinkered with there in certain moments, but really go back to his roots of horror. Sometimes when you're watching like a really visually cool sequence, I'm kind of just caught up in that.
Yeah.
But there are times where like, no, the scene is still really tense.
Yeah, and I'm really happy for him because, you know, I've been a big fan since the first Saw movie of both him and James Wan, and when he started to direct, I was just curious as to how that would take shape. This is, I believe, his third directing feature, and I appreciate that his style and his grip on the rest of the factions of filmmaking really seems to have confidently grown over time, because Upgrade was a big surprise, and everyone was like, oh, wow, this is so cool and punchy. And then this movie, kind of like Insidious did with Saw, really pulls it back into the very deliberate, restrained style. And so, you know, the flashes of violence and things like that are a lot more bold and vivid because of that.
Well, his tone and pacing is something that I love. The best way I'd sum it up, I brought this up before, like there tends to be two kind of horror films now, which is like there's the A24 ones, usually very character driven, slow, deliberately paced, not really big on the thrills until like maybe way late into the film. Then you got like your Conjurings, Nuns, and your It's. You got like popcorn horror, and then you got independent horror. And I think what he's done here is perfectly fused both, because this film is not necessarily like fast-paced for a lot of it, but it's always really intriguing and really entertaining and keeps you on edge, despite the fact of how the pacing surprised me, because, you know, you hear Universal and you're like, it's probably gonna be like a fast-paced thriller, and it's not that. You know, like
the old monster movies weren't. You know,
and the post-credit scene with Tom Cruise in the end. Oh my god,
it's all connected.
So cool.
But that's a couple just stray thoughts too. Is going back to your point about her growth as a character. Like I appreciated that you really do feel her grow over time. Like it's a really solid arc. I think doesn't just start out as a traditional traditional horror movie centerpiece. You watch her grow and have to figure things out as her life and the people in it are whittled down, which I thought was really nice. And that's one thing that Leigh Whannell said was kind of important in the script to him, was to have her grow that strength and find it over time instead of just having like an aha moment that's like, oh yeah, go get him now, you know?
Yeah, she's pushed to grow.
And the other thing I gotta give huge props to is just the opening. I feel like openings are tricky to make very striking, and a lot of times I'll find myself in movies being like, okay, I needed a few minutes to find the stride. But this movie has such a bold and gripping opening. I feel the need to point that out. Yeah, because there's not even dialogue for a good while. You know?
Yeah, I mean, this movie knows how to make great use of silence. There's not a lot of jump scares. There's a couple of moments that make you jump that are not even a jump scare, and I think that's what's cool.
Because you're paranoid the whole time. Yeah.
But there are moments where the whole crowd was like, "Whoa!"
Because it's
what the hell
pulls you into this place where the point isn't just going, okay, where's the jump coming
Where's
from?
the loud sound?
It's more like, what's it gonna be? When is it? Like, where and how? And like, yeah, it makes you question so much more that by the time the jump comes, you're off your guard more than you normally would be, I think.
I do want to give props to like Aldous Hodge. I thought he was really charismatic and really sincere.
Yeah,
Storm Reed I thought was great too. The character who plays Elisabeth Moss' sister, Harriet Dyer's the actress. Oliver Jackson Cohen is, I won't say much, but when he's there, he's good.
Yeah.
And the guy who plays the Invisible Man's brother, he's an actual like character in the film. It's not some spoiler. Michael Dorman does a really effective job. He kind of has a little bit of a Michael Shannon thing about him.
Like Michael Shannon meets Dane DeHaan or something.
I really hope more people watch this. I'm glad they made this movie for only like $7 million because it probably has a good chance of making its money back.
That's the Blumhouse way, my friends.
And I hope a lot of people watch this, because this is, if there is some dark universe forming, this is the right step.
This is the way to do that.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, what did you think of The Invisible Man? Leave your thoughts down below. What's the next Universal movie Blumhouse slice that you want to see them take on? Which character? Frankenstein? Leave your thoughts down below. Subscribe to The Real Rejects. Click that notification bell. And there are patrons who are pledged for our reward tier, where you get to access to our deleted takes, exclusive Patreon lens story, some behind the scenes stuff. We're putting together like sketches and whatever. And also we'd like to do some name call outs for these guys. We did some at the beginning of the month, and then now, since we're at the end of the month, we should probably shout out the rest. And those people are Ryan Beatty,
Rue, surname unimportant,
recently pledged Kenny Walters,
and our boy Jevy, Evgeny Karana.
Thank you, guys and girls, if any of you are girls, for pledging to our Patreon page. Hope you're having a good time over there. Thank you so much for being who you are, gang.
Who's that behind you?
What are you doing?
I'm trying to mess with the audience. Blue's Clues.